Okay, so in the Haftorah of Parsha Shoftim, it says Isaiah chapter 51, verse 12. Okay, maybe 13 in KJV or something like that. But here I'm just reading from the Talmud Chumash here in the back of the Haftorah. And it says this. In English, it says, "It is I am he who comforts you." The words used here in Hebrew is Anoki, Anoki, who menachem mi at vatiri me anosh yamut umi ben adam chatzir yinasim. It says, "It is I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you should be afraid of man? Who shall die, and of the Son of Man, who shall be set as grass?" Okay, so in the English it says, "It is I am he," or I, even I. But in the Hebrew it says, "Anochi, Anochi," I. And the Zera Shimshon, he addresses this. Why does it say I twice? And so he focuses on the term Anochi, and he quotes the Midrash, and the Midrash explains that it means to indicate a double gift. A double gift. Okay? Zera Shimshon explores the meaning of the double gift and also explains why it is alluded to specifically with the term Anoki. Okay? So take this in, pay attention. And he quotes the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni, and it says, Arabah says in the name of Shimon ben Lachish, it says, Mashal Lamelech Sheba'as al Metorana. This can be compared, Matorana. This can be compared to a king who became angry at his queen. And it says, La'achar Yamin Bikesh Lehach Chazira. After some time, he wanted to bring her back to his palace. Amra, however, she proclaimed, Yikpo li ketonati le'achar kach yachazireni. Let the king double the amount of my kasuba. So that basically the king became angry at the queen. It's like he divorced her, sent her away. He realized he made a mistake, and he wants her back. And the queen says, "Then let the king give me double the amount of my kasuba." Does everybody know what the kasuba is? In the marriage, in a Jewish wedding, there's a written document, and in order for a man to marry a virgin, he would pay 200 zuz, which is quite a bit of money, I believe. And that was the set standard. He was allowed to give more for the marriage as basically a gift for the bride. And so the king makes a mistake and he wants her back, and the queen says, "Then let him give me double, 400 zuz, and then he can bring me back." Chachamar HaKodesh Baruch Hu leIsrael. It says, in a similar vein, the Holy One, blessed is he, said to the Jewish people, Besinai Amarti lachem pa'am achat anochi Hashem Elohecha. At Sinai I said the word Anochi to you once in the verse, "I am Hashem your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt," in Shemos 20 verse 2. So when Hashem was giving the 10 commandments, the 10 words, he said Anochi. He said Anochi there. But with regard to your return to Yerushalayim in the future era, Ani omer lechem shetei amim anochi anochi hu. uh, menachemchem. I am saying anoki to you twice. In the verse, I and only I am he who comforts you in the half Torah, in Isaiah 51, verse 12. So the Midrash is saying that Hashem said Anoki once before when he took us out of Mitzrayim, and now he's going to say it again in the future. Okay? And Kashe, it is difficult to understand Ma Yiten Yoma Yosif the Israel Shavach Pa'ul Shel Milat Anoki. How the Jewish people will benefit, and what would they gain from doubling the word Anoki? What would they gain from Anoki being said twice? What's the point? Dama nafcha mina im yomar pa'am achat o shete pa'amim. What difference does it make if Hashem says Anoki once or twice? The od lama the emet yafor yichpor lachem. And why, in fact, will he repeat Anoki for the Jewish people in the final redemption? Uma inyan kefel ze. What is the meaning of this repetition? This is what the Zera Shimshon wants to know. Why does it say I twice? And he goes to explain that the Midrash is to teach that the coming redemption will be permanent. There will be no more further exiles. Explaining this in two steps, he focuses on a parable about the parable of the king and the queen and the idea of a double gift. So he's going to explain more about this parable and why is Anoki mean a double gift. And it says, Mitchila Haninu Yikulalim Lomar. Now we may initially say that this idea of doubling is based on the law that we follow as follows. And Zera Shimshon begins by noting two laws that pertain to a woman who has whose status as a virgin is compromised. So basically, I'm even going to call this study did Hashem slander the Jewish people? Did Hashem speak Lashon Hara to the Jewish people? And this can be compared to a woman whose status of being a virgin is compromised. The law is that one who violates or seduces a virgin is obligated to pay 50 selah coins. So we're going to see in the next parsha, I believe it's Kisetse, about if a man takes a woman. Actually, Kavir, I think, wow, it's actually been a year that's gone by, because I remember us talking about the touchy subject is a man raping a woman. And yes, the sages say that in some of these circumstances, some of the sages say this is dealing with rape. But anyway, that's next week. But the law is that one who violates or seduces a virgin is obligated to pay 50 selah coins, which is equal to 200 zuz, which the Torah refers to as the amount of the marriage contract of the virgins. So if a man does this and violates a woman, he has to pay 200 zuz. On the other hand, if someone slanders a Jewish virgin, accusing her of adultery, and it is discovered that his accusation was untrue, Meshalem hachafel, he must pay double that penalty. Tehanu me'at selah, which is 100 selahs. In other words, the payment for a false accusation regarding compromised virginity is double that of the actually compromising, the virginity is double that of the actually compromising a woman's virginity. So if someone made a claim, slandered a virgin, a woman, who has been pure and slanders her, and it finds out that she did not do any kind of adultery or any kind of that this accusation comes out untrue, that he has to pay her, and he's guilty of slander. Similarly, we must note that the law pertains to a woman who committed adultery while married, which is that she must leave the husband and forego her kasuba, and may never return to her husband. On the other hand, if a woman has been slandered by her husband and accused of unfaithfulness, just as he's required to double the amount of her kasuba, he's required to keep her as his wife forever. So if he slandered her, said things wrong, and he realizes he's allowed, it's a mitzvah to keep the marriage, to keep them together, but he must pay double. It's almost like he's doing a double mitzvah. He's getting married to her almost again. So it's almost like a double mitzvah, even though it wasn't right. And going on, accordingly, oh, and you guys are welcome to ask questions and comment. Don't feel like you have to stay quiet or whatever, you know. Anyways, accordingly, the queen's stipulation is in the parable is an appropriate request. In Cain, we therefore can explain as follows. When the king divorced the queen and sent her away from his palace, he in effect slandered her and implied that she had committed adultery. Since a husband is required to divorce an unfaithful wife, the fact that the king divorced her made it seem as though she had committed adultery. Thus, when he wants to bring her back, it becomes apparent that he had investigated further and discovered that his suspicions were without substance. They weren't true. As in truth, she had not committed adultery while she was married to him, and that is why she's permitted to him. She's allowed to come back, and why he wants to bring her back. Therefore, the queen demanded that he doubles her kasuba, in accordance with the law of one who slanders his wife. For once he sent her away from his house, everyone assumed that she must have committed adultery. Since that amount slandered, she demanded the appropriate penalty. So is everybody getting the whole parable and everything about the king and the queen? All of these things, everyone's good. So now Zera Shimshon is going to bring this out, comparing it with even Hashem and Israel. Okay, and it says, when Hashem sent the Jewish people into exile, they were similarly subject to the law of a slandered woman. Thus we gain insight into the parable of the Midrash. In the passage that sets forth the law of one who slanders his wife, we find the phrase, for he issued slander against the virgin of Israel. And that's in 22, verse 19. Zera Shimshon will paraphrase that verse, expounding, referring to Israel and the Jewish people. And so this is going to be amazing. So it says, now this law and logic is for the reason for doubling the term Anochi. For by sending the Jewish people into exile, Hashem issued a slander against the virgin of Israel. That is the actual virgin Israel. This is crazy. By Hashem sending Israel into exile, it's like he slandered the Jewish people. By sending the Jewish people into exile, Hashem implied that he was required to banish them in the same manner that the king in the parable was required to divorce his seemingly unfaithful queen. Since this essentially amounted to slandering the Jewish people, Hashem promised that he would compensate them in a manner of a woman who has been slandered by doubling the term Anochi. Anochi, Anochi. So, the Zera Shimshon also quotes the Zohar, adds to some of this as well, but I'm not going to get into that. And he says, and for this reason as well, the Holy One, blessed is he, will redeem us with the final redemption. we will never have another exile. For with regard to man who slanders his wife, it is stated further, she shall remain with him as a wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. So that right there was pretty amazing for me to learn that even Zera Shimshon, the parable with the king sending away the wife, it's like he slandered her. But wait a minute, Hashem sent away Israel. It's like he slandered them, right? The thoughts came into my mind. I don't know if thoughts are coming into your mind. Was it slander? Was it not slander? You know, what does an unfaithful wife do? She commits adultery. When I read this, I'm like, but wait a minute. Questions came in my head. Israel did commit adultery. The Egel Zahav. But let's see what Zera Shimshon says. With regard to the repetition of the term Enochi, we may suggest further as follows. It is stated in a number of midrashim that the earlier redemptions, such as the redemption from Egypt, were, since they were brought about through mortal men, therefore they were followed by additional exiles. Okay? Zera Shimshon says that the redemptions in the earlier times were brought by men, like Moshe brought Israel out of Egypt, right? Other exiles were by men of God. And then Zera Shimshon says, but these were, through the Midrashim, say they were brought about by normal men. Shira, Shabbat Shalom. I'm just reading from Zera Shimshon. So we're kind of into it, but I'm recording as well, and it's amazing. I'm on page 429, just in case anybody has the book or wants to know.
All right.
Okay, so
I'm gonna go get mine. You keep it going.
Okay, for sure. The term Enochi and its repetition of the verse in Haftorah alludes to the above contrast. The coming words of Zera Shimshon are based on an idea that he develops elsewhere. That when Hashem used the term Enochi in his promise to Abraham, that his descendants would be redeemed from Egypt, he meant to indicate that he would redeem them himself in a direct manner. Thus, the term Enochi appears in connection with the Machas Bechuros, meaning the plague of the firstborn. Okay, what happened with the plague of the firstborn? This is what he says. He says, and now regarding the redemption from Mitzrayim, although Hashem's promise to Abraham that the nation that they will serve, it says that they will serve, I shall judge, Bereshit 15:14, which was said with the term Anochi, was thus fulfilled through the plague of the firstborn. Okay? You guys know what I'm talking about? Through Pesach, when the 10 plagues came, what happened? It says that Hashem passed through. It was Hashem himself. This is what the Midrash says. The sages expound, I am not an angel. I am not an emissary. From the Mechilta, it says, Hashem brought the redemption. Page 429. And nevertheless, most of the makos, the plagues that led to the redemption, were brought through Moshe and Aaron. We see that although the term Anochi implies Hashem's direct involvement, it does not entirely preclude human involvement. Amnam, however, le'atid lavo yeh hakol beyad hakodesh baruch hu. In future times, the redemption will be entirely through the hand of Hakodesh Baruch Hu. And it will therefore be permanent. It's not going to be through a human. It's not going to be through an intermediary. So this also comes with my whole belief on how everything's coming down when I talk about Mashiach coming back and everything. You know, how is he coming back? But That's for later. But it's the sages say it's going to be Hashem. Hashem's going to personally be the one that takes us out of redemption, the final redemption. And by repeating the word Anoki, Hashem meant to indicate that the future redemption will come through him. The basis of the coming approach is the physical redemption, is that the physical redemption from exile, both from Mitzrayim and in the future era, actually reflects a spiritual redemption from the forces of impurity that abound among the nations of the world. Zera Shimshon introduces this approach by explaining why the redemption from Mitzrayim had to be done in haste, why it had to be done in a hurry. Okay? So then it says, Od b'derech acher, another approach. So now he's going to go to a different explanation here, but it's all going to come back. So he says, as we know, the redemption from Mitzrayim was in haste. By contrast, with regard to the redemption in the future era, it is written at the end of the Haftorah in Yeshayah 52 verse 12, you will not leave in haste, nor will you go in flight. That is, redemption from Egypt had to come in haste, as the Jewish people were submerged in the impurities of idolatry of Egypt and had not yet been purified. It was therefore necessary to illuminate for them a great divine light, so that the damaging and challenging forces which are associated with impurity and idolatry would flee. As it is written in Tehillim 104:22, with regard to wild beasts, which is an allusion to the forces of impurity. When the sun shines, they are gathered in. The forces of impurity had been holding the Jewish people captive, and that was reflected in their slavery to Mitzrayim. Hashem redeemed the Jewish people by shining a great and sudden divine light, which caused the forces of impurity to quickly disappear, thus releasing the Jewish people. But sudden light is short-lived, and so was the redemption. By contrast, the final redemption will not have to come in haste, and it therefore will be permanent. And he goes on, V'achar Yom Tov Harishon, after the first day of Yom Tov, Pesach, Shechavar Yatsu, once the Jewish people had already emerged from the forces of impurity that Egypt represented, that heavenly light was hidden, and the impurity reverted to its original state. And it says, as known in the writings of the Arizal, he says, therefore in the future era, when the redemption will be everlasting, he says, me'at me'at, little by little, the heavenly illumination will come in increments. You know, like I said, I read this week, and then I came across Alona Nova doing the same study. I didn't even know he did the study, but this is where he gets into, he talks about, he kind of goes into his, what some people would call conspiracy theory, but I think Alona Nova is dead on when he says, I mean, the sages, the Torah even says that in the last days, Hashem's going to unsheath the sun. Avodah Zorah says this, and the tractate of Avodah Zorah, and even the Torah, but he's going to unsheath the sun. What's interesting is it's also coming close to Sukkot. JJ, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Nice.
Just reading from Zera Shimshon.
Oh, you got that. Nice.
Yeah. And so the sun is going to be unsheathed. And what's interesting is that there's in the tractate of Avodah Zorah, it talks about the sukkah, how the nations are going to make the sukkah. And okay, Vidya has a question. Yes, Vidya.
No, brother. No.
No question? Just give me a high five. Okay. So yeah, the nations will build a sukkah because they're crying out for Hashem to redeem them, because they see it's all taking place when the nations are going against Israel, Gog and Magog, which is also hinted around the time of Sukkot that the sages say that Gog and Magog will take place. And you know, if you look around in the world today and what's going on, especially here in Canada, it looks like a big possibility. But anyways, the Alona Nava says the sun will be unsheathed. It means it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. What's crazy here, for the past 2 weeks, I've been sweating every day. The heat is like intense here in Canada anyway. And but he goes into this doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the sun. It can mean other things like even a bomb, nuclear reactions, or even 5G, he was saying. But you'd have to go watch Alona Nava talk about that. But I was like, I'm in agreement with him. I'm in agreement with him. I think he's dead on. He speaks the truth that others are afraid to talk about. But anyways, the sages say that the light is going to increase in the final redemption. And the Jewish people will become completely purified. And the verse says, Hashem will be an eternal light for you in Yeshayah 60 verse 19. Will be fulfilled with regard to them. This verse alludes to the eternity of the final redemption as an eternal light and associates that light with Hashem himself. And this is the intent of the term Anoki, since the divine light appeared for one fleeting moment at the time of Exodus, and the term Anoki appears only once. However, since in the future light it will increase gradually and appear repeatedly, it therefore says Anoki twice. Hashem's going to do it, but it's going to do it in increments. I mean, this is where even it's possible a 7-year tribulation in these things. This isn't nothing new. Judaism talks about this as well, and that it's a process. It's a process bringing up to redemption. You're right. And so then he goes into a Kabbalistic thing, but then he also quotes here Yalkut Shimoni again. And it says the following on the verse, I have separated you from the peoples to be mine. Vayikra 20, verse 26. So in Vayikra, it says Hashem separated us from the nations. Okay? And this is, I thought this was mind-blowing right here. This is where he gets into halakha. And he says, if the verse would have said, I have separated the peoples from you, which would mean that Hashem removed idolaters from the Jewish people. But he didn't. Hashem removed us from the nations. He didn't remove the nations from us. Okay? And he says, if he did that, if he removed the idolaters from the Jewish people, the idolatrous nations of the world would not exist. So right away, well, wait a minute, wouldn't that be a good thing? Wouldn't that be a better thing? But this is amazing what the Midrash says. Instead, the verse says, I have separated you from the peoples, which means that Hashem removed the Jewish people from the idolaters. This is similar to one who separates good from the bad. So, do you know about the Malacha Borer on Shabbat separating? You guys know about this halakha? The law of separating on Shabbat? So, here's an example for those that don't know. If you have a bowl of apples and one of the apples in the bowl is rotten or just looks unpleasant and is no good, you're not allowed to remove that bad apple and separate it from the good apples. That's actually forbidden on Shabbat. So what do you do if you have this problem? The rabbis say you can throw more good apples over top so you don't have to see it. But you're allowed to take good apples all the time out of the bowl, all you want. But if you remove that bad apple, the bowl becomes muksa. You know what muksa is? Muksa is an object that has no use on Shabbat. It's not allowed to be moved or touched. An example, a TV remote. If you have a TV remote on the couch and you're going to sit there, it's forbidden to even move it. Now, some that don't know halakha go, these rabbis are crazy. You're telling me I can't move a TV remote on Shabbat? Why can't I do this? Why can't I remove, or why can't I separate the good, a bad apple from the good? These guys are they're so crazy. They're making new laws over other laws. What's interesting is Hashem follows the halakha himself. Hashem follows the halakha. And the reason why we don't remove a TV remote, it's rabbinically forbidden, not biblically forbidden. So if you move it, okay. But it's rabbinically forbidden. And the sages were putting a fence on the mitzvah because you may be tempted to turn on the TV and even do other things that are really, you shouldn't be doing on Shabbat. And so, even when it comes to separating Israel from the nations, he did it in a halakhic way. What does it? Yes.
Real quickly, does this allude to the separation of the wheat and the tares as well?
That's exactly what I was thinking when I read it. Exactly.
Matthew, yeah.
Yeah, I actually literally wrote down the verse for the wheat and tares on the next page that I'm about to get into. But yeah, you're right. Your mind is flowing exactly like the way I was studying. And I even, yeah.
Right, and I think what you said earlier is like if you got some like cashew nuts or peanuts and some kind of nuts, you can't just choose what you like because everything is holy on Shabbat, you know. So you just can't select few things what you like, right? So that is the earlier reference you were trying to give, right?
Yeah, and I was so amazed by this commentary. I even had to pull out the 39 malachot just to review separating good from the bad. And I have it here, and it talks about separating the good from the bad. A lot of people don't know this, and this may be strange. I one time got to visit a rabbi on Shabbat, and he was teaching me this one night. And I never heard it in my life, and I was so blown away. But he talks about it. If a fly is in your drink, one may spoon out or pour some of the liquid together with the fly, right? Because you're removing a mixture of types, but you cannot remove the fly by itself if it's together. So even, believe it or not, even if you have like a steak on Shabbat and you want to remove the fat, you can't just cut off the fat, only the fat. Otherwise it's separating. But you're allowed to cut off a piece of the meat along with the fat because then it's mixed, and that is okay. Or you're allowed to cut off some of the fat and leave some of the fat on the steak, but the other way around. But you cannot have it totally separated because that is the law of separating. And
actually, before you continue, I just thought of tzitzit. It's a mixture.
It is, but you're also right. But you
because you're not supposed. Those two garments are not supposed to be mixed, but that's the one exception in the Torah where it is allowed because it's priestly.
Yes, that's right. But they're not separated on Shabbat in any way. You wouldn't want to separate them. But yeah, that is a mixture.
But the point being that it's a mixture.
Yeah. Which is a whole other, then you have to go into Kabbalah to understand all that.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that to me was amazing because this is why Hashem didn't remove the nations from Israel all at once. Because if you did that, I'm done with Israel. It's muksa. And so he says, and then has to again separate further. So this is similar to one who separates the good from the bad and then has to again separate it further. By contrast, when he separates bad from the good, he will not have to separate further. Generally, one who removes bad from the good determines that anything he removes is unusable before he removes it, and is therefore unnecessary for him to go back, to re-examine what he removed. So if Hashem removed the nations, then he says, okay, there's no further reason to go back. I'm done. I just completed the task. But Hashem doesn't do that. In the same way, he removes the good from the bad. He must repeatedly make sure that there's not any good left from the bad. So if Hashem takes a bit of Israel out of Mitzrayim, he's allowed to go back and say, maybe I forgot a couple individuals, and he can keep going back. And this is Hashem's mercy. This is Hashem's mercy. And so, with regard to this as well, that is with regard to the elements of holiness that is remain embedded with the nations, it is stated, I am a shield for you. Okay, it says, Anochi Magen Lach in Bereshit 15:1. Using the term Anochi, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Abraham that the kernel of good that was within them had indeed separated from the impurity around it, and despite the fact that a portion of it did later become submerged in evil, it will eventually emerge from there again. Oh wow, Emmett's coming on. Baruch Hashem. Shabbat Shalom, Emmett. Good Shabbos, bro.
Shabbat Shalom.
So we're just in the middle of a study of Zera Shimshon. And yeah, I read this week, and it was amazing. And then I realized that Alona Navad did a study on it as well, but I didn't know that. But it's super awesome, and that's what I'm sharing today. So we're just talking about how Hashem follows halakha and how he removes the good from the bad. He removes Israel from the bad. He doesn't remove the bad from Israel, which is just like halakha on Shabbat. When we have a bowl of apples and there's one bad, we're not allowed to remove the bad. Anyway, I just finished explaining that. And yeah, we're discussing the half Torah of Yeshaya 51 verse 12. Why Hashem says Anochi, Anochi. So just to give you a little of where we're going here. And then it says, however, this that the kernel of good was in them and he had separated. However, this indicates that Hashem will eventually make further separations in the manner of one who separates the good from the bad. Now the term Anochi, when it expresses this idea, but in the context uses the term only one time, back in Bereshit. Here, however, regarding the final redemption, the verse repeats the term Anochi, Anochi. I only am he who comforts you. And this indicates that Hashem will perform repeated separations, thus ensuring that absolutely no elements of holiness will remain lost among the idolatrous nations. So here's an example. The sages say, why was Israel in Mitzrayim in the first place? Why did Yosef have to go to Mitzrayim? Right? Why did Yosef go down to Mitzrayim? Because the sages say in Pesachim 87 that he was there to make converts. And so you see, even Hashem drawing out Israel, that the mixture of the good and the bad, that bad can only survive on with the holiness around them. And that holiness may actually influence some of that bad to become pure as well. And so Hashem repeatedly goes back and checks the good, separates the good from the bad. And so this is why he didn't remove the bad all at once. It's because of Hashem's mercy. Even though we may look at it like, oh, we're in Mitzrayim, we're in Egypt, we're in exile, it's not such a bad thing. We're actually bringing more holiness. And at that time, though, the idolatrous nations of the world will not be able to survive, as they will no longer have any trace of holiness that could give them strength in the future redemption. Rather, on the contrary, their strength and hope will be lost, as indicated by the single appearance of the term Anochi that is stated to Abraham and the initial extraction of holiness from the forces of impurity will be in stages. Thus, when it says Enochi in connection with Exodus, this implies that that the nations will remain in existence and that it would be possible to face further exiles. Hashem repeated the word Enochi in connection with the final redemption to indicate at that time the holiness will be completely extracted from the nations, so there will be no further exiles. And yeah, Zipporah, when that came to my mind with Yeshua saying this, we let the wheat and the tares grow together. Like, he didn't remove any. He says in the end they will be fully grown, and then he will know which is good and which is going to remain, and that will be the end of it. Or also like separating the sheep from the goats. You know, everything's going to come to light, and those that are just completely absorbed in wickedness will go to this side, and the righteous will go this way. And yeah, those were some verses that came to my mind. And just to further, I'm almost finished here. And we go back, the Zera Shimshon goes back to the parable of the Midrash, explaining about the king who banished the queen, and that in order for her to come back, she needs double her kasuba. So what I was explaining for those that missed it, that the king slandered his wife, accused her of adultery, but he investigated further, found out she was wrong, and then brings her back. And in order to bring her back, he pays double the kasuba, almost like twice the marriage. And here, the Zera Shimshon says the same thing, that explaining the comparison of the Jewish people to the queen who requested that her kasuba be doubled as a condition for her return, meant to indicate that the Jewish people would not be subject to further exiles once the final redemption arrives. He suggested in the following sections of the Drash a number of reasons for why the repetition of Enochi implies this idea that there will be no more further exiles. And also, this explains, so we have the kasuba, the Enochi for a double kasuba, a double payment, but then we also learned a bit about the double Enochi, as Zera Shimshon means this is a double gift. So now the Zera Shimshon says, okay, we understand about the double kasuba, the 400 zuz, but how do we make this, what's the double gift? How does this all match in? And he says another approach, according to the Midrash drew a comparison between the repetition of Enochi, a queen and the king, and then he goes, what is the Enochi alluding to the kasuba, and what is the significance? For a kasuba is an actual gift that the husband gives to the wife. The kasuba is a gift to the wife, and she already got a kasuba. So how is this a double gift? What is the double gift? And he's basically saying that when Israel is in exile, this is the inner essence of holiness. There's still holiness within that exile. And who's coming out? Who's coming out? The ingathering of the Gentiles. The coming of the Gentiles, who are also becoming a part of this marriage, who are also grafting themselves out. And guess what? They also get to come in with the kasuba. And so this is not only for Israel, but those that are grafting themselves in as well. They're getting married again too. Anochi, Anochi. I married you, I married them. Now, also from my own notes here, so we see the story that it's interesting that because Zera Shimshon says the king slandered his wife, but found out that she didn't commit adultery. But wait a minute, did Israel commit adultery or not? Were they faithful to Hashem? According to the Torah, they looked pretty steeped in idolatry. The Egel Zahav, they basically broke off the engagement themselves at Mount Sinai when Moshe smashed the ketubah, right? And so Zera Shimshon says, no, no, no. It was like Hashem slandered the Jewish people. But now Hashem says, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you twice. You didn't do anything wrong. What? This reminds me of Yeshua on the stake when he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's almost as if when I'm reading this that Hashem says, forgive me, I didn't know what I was talking about. Hashem's taking it on himself. It's just an accident. No, no, no. I was wrong. I didn't divorce you. You guys are completely innocent. In fact, I'm paying you double, and I'm going to redeem you myself, not by a mediator. I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring the redemption, and I am going to be there. I'm going to fight your battle, and I'm going to bring you out personally. Anochi, Anochi. And for those that say, but Hashem really did divorce Israel. A lot of people will quote in Jeremiah, and I learned this from somewhere, and I never forgot it, but it has to do with halakha too. So just for those that say that Hashem did divorce Israel, in times to come when Israel is redeemed from among the nations and Hashem gathers us to him, Israel will say, Rabbono Shel Olam, it is written in your Torah that when a man banishes her from his life, should the woman marry again and then divorce the second husband, she may never return to her first husband. You banished us among the nations of the world. How is it possible for you to take us back? And Hashem will say to them, it says in the laws of divorce, when a man will banish her from his house. I am God, not man. And then he says, the words from the Midrash are most perplexing. The relationship between the Jewish people and Hashem is understood to be that of a marriage of a husband and wife. How can it be possible that about this very subject, Hashem would say, I am God and not man? It looks like a marriage between man and wife. What are you talking about? Let us understand the Midrash. The Talmud teaches us that if a man throws a get, a bill of divorce, to his wife while she's in his yard, the divorce is not effective. For a get to work, it needs to be given, and since his wife is still in his yard, in his dominion, there is the deficiency in the giving. It is as though the get never left the orbit of his influence. And thus, with the principle in mind, we can understand what Hashem is saying. I am God, not man. The universe is mine. The whole world is my yard. Thus, I never really gave you a get at all. I never divorced you. And therefore, Anochi, Anochi, I will bring you out. There we go. Yeah. Baruch Hashem. And I'll